So, Jenna, first, your documentary series Time, the Kalief Browder Story, premiered on Spike TV to great critical acclaim and strong responses from audiences. It's going to be seen by more people soon when it's on Netflix later this month. I want to start by asking you, what compelled you, what drew you to this story?
That's a great question. I've had the honor over the last 10 years of working on some really substantial projects that tackled the war at home here in America, from Brick City, which I got a chance to develop at, a fairly young age. In my early 20s, I was on the ground floor of that project, worked for 5 years, 11-hour series about Newark, New Jersey, the ills facing that community, from the cops to the gangs, the teachers and the street healers who were making a change in their community. I went on to do a project called Chicagoland, which tackled similar issues. I myself was the correspondent on the South Side for 5 years over the course of multiple projects that culminated with Chicagoland. So I felt like I had a prerequisite. Living in New York, I read this story. My partner Julia Nason, who runs our company, the Cinemart, with myself and our other partners, Nick Sandow, Mike Gasparo, we have an open mind to these topics. And our partner Nick, had been reading the New Yorker stories and looking at the coverage, as were we. And when Kalief died, there was a visceral response from us, I believe, as there was from many people, from those, of course, who knew him, but from many people who didn't know him. And Nick, having been on Orange is the New Black and having this kind of role in exploring mass incarceration, he came to me and Julia and said, we got to do something about this. And I know you guys, could have a vision for how this could work. And right off the bat, Julia and I knew that this would need to be a docuseries. It would need to be a docuseries that was developed with integrity and with momentum, and that we would need to get our act together and bring it to a partner who could cut through the lassitude that sometimes is found when projects go into a television buying environment, into development. There's a lot of drag. And so Jay-Z had personally been connected to Kalief Browder. He had sought him out. He had met him. And from day one, we knew that Jay would be an incredible partner for this, someone whose heart was in the right place and who had the attention of the world to push through and get this made the way it needed to be made. Months, the Cinemart, my company with Julia Nason and Nick Sandow and our partner Mike Gasparo, developed this project and got it ready to present to Jay-Z personally. Jay's associate, Shaka Pilgrim, who works at Rock Nation, she had been at the funeral, and we created a direct connection with Jay, and he viewed the project and almost instantly said, "What can I do?" And within a couple weeks, we were meeting with Harvey and the Weinstein Company. Little did we know of their ongoing relationship and the first look deal that they were crafting together. And there was a sort of serendipity that arose, in Kalief's, honor, that this would be the first project they tackled together, and that this would be something that they put all of their might and their power behind. And when we got in the room with Spike TV, we were humbled and, quite frankly, baffled with the type of commitment that they were ready to make and that Viacom was ready to make to support this project. And having worked on the projects that I, discussed earlier, I've never seen this level of commitment from a network before, whether from all the way down from Bob Bakish down to Kevin Kay, that Chachi Sr., Sharon Levy, all the people that worked on this project, and all of the people who worked in the extended team of Viacom, the Weinstein Company, and Rock Nation. This was a team that, for us making the work was comprised of about 30 people in our office at the Cinemart. But when you combine Rock Nation, Viacom, and TWC, there were hundreds of people working on this project every day and ensuring that it would reach the audience it needed to reach. So the genesis was very organic, but the result was absolutely humbling and remarkable.
And I mean, the series really does show you Kalief, the man, and not the symbol. Can you talk a little bit about the research that you did and what you discovered about Kalief as a young man?
Well, I think it's a very surreal experience to be a biographer for a subject who has passed, especially one who has passed only weeks, prior to you getting involved in the project. And to think that I've been walking the streets of New York City or riding a train at the same time that Kalief could have been on that train or could have been on that street. So there was sort of a surreal experience of needing to get to know this person in the kind of most immediate way. And the way we approached it is very different than the way that all the reporters had approached it previously. The reporters who approached it previously had a subject, they had Kalief, and they did single source pieces that explored his point of view and what he was going through. And what we did was very different. We did 1,000 sources of every person who had ever known him, who had ever been with him in the room with him, who had ever been affected with him, from his preschool teacher to his friends on the block, to every family member, to every intimate memory his mother had of him, his brothers had of him, to comprise a picture of a man that I think had only scratched the surface of telling his story before we lost him. And so it was a very intensive process to understand this person from 1,000 points of view, to then converge into a singular experience of a young man who had gone through this experience.
And speaking of that experience, I mean, the show shines a very harsh and critical light upon the prison system in this country, particularly, of course, Rikers, which is where Kalief was imprisoned. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, you know, being a New Yorker and knowing many other New Yorkers across generations, Rikers Island was, and has always been known as a torture chamber. Anyone who's been there knows it. You know, you walk through the halls of Rikers Island, especially the juvenile unit, you feel like you're in a concentration camp. So to think that this place exists in New York City is absolutely, you know, it's hard to comprehend. And then, you know, to think about the history of Rikers Island and that it's named after an infamous slave catcher who was, you know, in business with bounty hunters who were kidnapping freed and escaped slaves and sending them back to the South for cash kickback. And to think that that was kind of happening in the present day New York City in 2000, in the 2000s, in the 90s, you know, today, is the type of realization that I think really will make your toenails curl up and make you, you know, say to yourself, you know, what can I do to shut this place down forever? And so we interfaced with Mayor de Blasio. You know, he finally started paying attention to the work we were doing. I had requests to enter Rikers Island up to almost 2 years ago. They didn't pay any attention to it until Jay-Z and Harvey got in front of the cameras and said, we're doing this project. Of course, that changes everybody's tune. But when we got in there, it was sort of a dog and pony show. Let us show you these great programs. We're bringing dogs in here to work with inmates. Look, we have a new woodworking workshop. They're learning computer skills. But yeah, when I talked to every one of the kids, their bails were 100,000 for, you know, trespassing, or, you know, they were 16 facing 20 years when really if they had a good lawyer, they would have been out yesterday. So, you know, it's a slow motion train wreck that New Yorkers know intimately, but the rest of America doesn't, the rest of the world doesn't. So it was our mission to shine light on it so that we could shut down Rikers forever.
And can you talk a bit about the treatment that Kalief endured while he was in there? That, I mean, eventually it led to his suicide.
Yeah, well, I think one of the most touching things, especially for me being a young man, you know, not to veer off too much into my own experience, but I certainly wasn't a model student. I wasn't a model kid. I got in a lot of trouble and luckily dodged going to jail and prison myself. But to think of the type of environment that Kalief was enduring, and one of the most poignant ways of describing it was Lord of the Flies. And any of us who know that story know the type of fear and carnal energy that youth can have, especially when they're not supervised. And that's what he was enduring every day, fighting for his life, being victimized, and getting to the point at which he was a very strong soul. And, you know, he wasn't a big kid. You know, he's only a little bit over 5 feet tall. But he wasn't going to allow himself to be victimized. He wasn't going to allow himself to be played. He wasn't going to allow himself to be co-opted into the gangs that were basically extorting kids. And for that reason, he began to get into a lot of fights. And the guards responded to his fights by putting him in solitary confinement. And, you know, for anyone who understands the brain damage that can occur in solitary confinement, after only 15 days, we're talking about potentially permanent brain damage. Kalief, by the time he was 18, had endured almost 400 days of consecutive solitary confinement. His brain would never be the same. And while he was in there, he was being tortured from every level, denied first toilet paper, then denied a shower for weeks, then physically assaulted on several occasions, and starved. So to think that this could happen to a child who hasn't even gone to trial yet, who hasn't been convicted of a crime, is one of the most horrific facts to learn and internalize. And I think that the news stories have been able to put it in short form, but to see the man and to see his family and to hear the human experience as that was unfolding and to see the surveillance footage that we were very privileged to obtain from our trusted sources, I think it was that convergence that led to the moment we are at today, where the whole world is paying attention to this story. And hopefully the whole world will never forget who he is and value his life forever because it mattered, regardless of whether the system thought it did or not.
Absolutely. You interview a wide variety of subjects for this show, not just his family and friends, but also people like Andrew Cuomo and Van Jones, Al Sharpton, Jay-Z himself. Can you talk a little bit about their passion for this story and bringing that out as an interviewer?
It doesn't take much. It takes a phone call that says, "Hi, we're doing the Kalief Browder story. Can we speak with you?" And the answer is yes, when? Because so many people were viscerally affected by this project, whether it was the governor or the mayor or Jay or Al Sharpton or Michelle Alexander, Van Jones, Eric Holder. Everyone had an opinion about what happened here, and the symbolism behind this was the most poignant, symbolic story of our broken system, but from the perspective that people hadn't tackled yet, which was pretrial detention, which was being arrested for things you shouldn't be arrested for. And let's look back to 2011, the year after Kalief Browder was arrested. 700,000 people stopped in the stop and frisk program. Only 9% of those people were white. Okay, many of those people ended up going to Rikers Island. That is not American. And I don't care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, that's not who we are as Americans. And so this program, regardless of its appearance of being, progressive or left-leaning, is really about American liberty. And even folks like Rand Paul got in front of crowds on his stump speeches when he was running for president and invoked Kalief Browder's name over and over and over again. Because this has nothing to do with Democrat or Republican. This is a bipartisan issue about American liberty, and it's not who we are as people, and it doesn't make any sense, and it's absolutely chaotic and insane, and it's driven by corporate greed ultimately and by lobbying interests. So we have to get to the bottom of this, but Kalief's human experience, I think, gives people a chance to internalize it in a way that statistics can't. So we knew that from the beginning, and so did all the sources that we interviewed, and they were ready and available to take part in the project.
Well, certainly, I think it helps that the series is so compellingly made. Can you talk about, just from a technical standpoint, about gathering all this information, all these interviews, all these facts, and putting them together into a multi-part docuseries, essentially telling his story?
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous question. I've had the good fortune of having a craft, my whole career as a filmmaker. I was an editor by trade. I edited almost every frame of Brick City and Chicagoland and several other programs like that, and every film I've ever made. So in approaching Kalief, I knew that the edit would be one of the most important phases of the project, and it began immediately. So I was extremely hands-on in the edit. I had an incredibly talented team, really a wingman, Chris Pasek, who I think is an absolutely amazing editor. But I lived in the edit, and I touched every single frame of this show, in addition to directing and executive producing it. So, my workload was very staggering. Myself and my partner, Julia Nason, literally slept in our office for about 9 months. And I had a hands-on approach to making it, and I knew that it would have to take a vanguard stylistic treatment to break through, people's, I hate to use the word lassitude again, but to break through this kind of numbed out feeling that people have when this story comes on the air. Oh, that's so bad. Oh, that's too bad that that's happening. And we didn't want people to even be able to get away with having that feeling. So our approach was to apply a bombast, to apply a sense of edge and a style that made the carnage and the pain and the human experience up and down. You know, it's not all pain. There's some beautiful human qualities that are expressed in this program. And I think our approach was to create a style that would cut through the noise and people couldn't look away from. And that was something I crafted hands-on in the edit.
What draws you to the documentary format?
I think that's a great question. Being someone who I wanted to start making films at 14, I started pursuing that goal. I made several short films before even getting to college. And for me, a film is a film. So whether it's fiction or nonfiction, it still follows the same kind of craft, storytelling, visual mise en scène of how something is put together. And I always looked at documentary similar to fiction. And my ambitions to be a fiction filmmaker are still very real. And I view stories as stories. And I think that viewers, when they can experience stories as stories and forget that they're watching, something that's a documentary or a scripted show, I think that they have a chance to, really let this material penetrate them. And I think that's part of the ineffable quality of film, is that it affects us. It affects us in a way that the written word doesn't, or that a photograph even doesn't. There's something really profound that happens in the process of the brain when watching a movie. And so I really believe in that deeply. And so for me, whether it's a documentary or a scripted piece of work, I'm just trying to get to that moment of ineffability where someone cannot describe the feeling they have, but they can't take their eyes off the screen. And that's what drove me to make the work this way.
What do you hope, as people continue to discover this, and once it's on Netflix, even more people will discover it, what do you hope people take away from this ultimately?
I want them to feel something. And I think that there's no way to avoid feeling something when you see this story. And I want them to think of the millions of Americans who are going through what Kalief Browder went through. I think that that's really important, that he's not alone, that there's millions of people going through what he went through, but few are strong enough to do what he did. But beyond that, I want people to understand the collateral damage. It's not just about the person in the jail or the person who was arrested. It's about their mother and their families and the wrecking ball that goes through the household and destroys it forever. And we were able to make those connections in Kalief's story and show that his family had experienced an injustice in the 90s that led to the destabilization of their home that Kalief was growing up in. His fear of police arrived from his brother being kidnapped, essentially, for a crime he didn't commit. Is collateral damage. And there's folks, Black, white, Hispanic, of all creeds, mostly people who are poor, who are experiencing this on a daily level. We need to open our hearts and our minds to those folks and figure out a way to change this system forever. And hopefully we're at the precipice now where Kalief Browder's name, his mother Vanita's name, are ringing in people's ears. And whether it's, this award season or whatever it is, that's not the point. The point is their lives matter, and we should honor them and continue to honor them for all of time.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much, and congratulations on the series. It's very powerful stuff.
Thank you so much for this interview. I really appreciate you. It's been a great interview. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. Have a good one.
You too.